Think about the most put-together person you know. The one who always shows up. The one who laughs easily, meets every deadline, maintains the group chat, remembers everyone's birthday, and always seems to have their life exactly where it needs to be. Now ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you actually asked that person how they were doing and waited for a real answer? Because there is something quietly devastating happening inside a large number of people who look by every visible measure completely fine. They are high-achieving, socially present, and perpetually smiling. And somewhere behind all of that, they are running on empty in a way that no one around them can see. Today, we are going to go deep into the psychology of people who look fine on the outside but feel hollow on the inside. And what we find there is going to change the way you see the people closest to you. There is a term that mental health professionals have been using with increasing frequency, and it is one that most people have never encountered in a clinical context. Smiling depression. It is not listed as a formal diagnosis in the standard manual used by psychiatrists, but its reality is well documented and widely recognized by therapists, clinical psychologists, and researchers who work with people across all walks of life. Smiling depression describes a specific experience where a person carries all of the internal weight of depression, the sadness, the sense of hopelessness, the exhaustion and emotional numbness, while simultaneously presenting a functioning, cheerful, and socially competent version of themselves to the world. The smile in this case is not happiness, it is armor. And it is some of the most convincing armor a human being can wear. What makes this particular experience so difficult to untangle is the way it defies the image most people carry in their heads when they hear the word depression. The cultural picture of depression tends to be someone who cannot get out of bed, who stops showering, who withdraws from all social contact and stares blankly at walls. And that version of depression is real and deserves every bit of compassion it receives. But it is only one version. The person running smiling depression looks nothing like that picture. They are at the party. They are at the office. They are making people laugh and holding others together and saying all the right things. And then they go home, close the door behind them, and the mask comes off. What is underneath it has been there the entire time. Researchers have described this experience using a term that captures it precisely: the internal split. On one side of that split is the functioning self, the version that gets things done, that shows up, that manages and performs and achieves. On the other side is the suffering self, the part that feels a persistent and low-level ache that never quite goes away. A flatness where enjoyment used to live. A numbness that settles in during quiet moments and makes even ordinary pleasures feel like they are happening behind a pane of glass. The functioning self is what the world sees. The suffering self is what the person lives with every single day, often for years, sometimes for decades, without anyone ever asking the right questions. The neuroscience behind this experience has been illuminating in ways that go beyond what traditional mental health conversations have offered. Research from neuroscientists studying emotional emptiness in high-functioning individuals found something unexpected. Unlike people experiencing major depressive episodes, where brain scans show reduced activity in regions associated with emotional regulation and increased activation of the threat processing centers, people experiencing this functional form of inner emptiness show a different pattern entirely. Their prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making and executive function, is often fully intact or even elevated in activity. What is disrupted is the brain's reward valuation system. The regions responsible for generating what neuroscientists call the meaning signal, the felt sense that an experience matters. that it is worth engaging with, that it is real. When that signal goes quiet, life continues. Everything gets done. But nothing quite lands. Nothing quite satisfies. You are present everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This is the experience clinicians sometimes describe using the term anhedonia, which comes from the Greek words for without and pleasure. It is one of the most underreported symptoms in psychology precisely because it does not look like suffering from the outside. The person experiencing anhedonia is not crying. They are not shutting down. They are going to dinner with friends and laughing at the right moments and ordering dessert. But the laughter does not quite reach them. The food does not taste like it used to. The music that once moved them now passes through them without catching on anything. It is not sadness in the conventional sense. It is more like the steady dimming of a light that used to burn brighter. And because the light is still on, nobody thinks to check if anything is wrong. One of the most consistent findings in research on this hidden form of emotional suffering is how often it originates in childhood. Psychologists have identified a pattern called parentification, which occurs when a child is placed in the position of managing the emotional needs of the adults around them. Whether due to a parent's mental health struggles, addiction, illness, or emotional unavailability, the child learns early that their role is to stabilize others rather than to be stabilized themselves. They become the capable one, the responsible one, the one who reads the room and adjusts. They become, in other words, expert performers of wellness, and they do it so young and so thoroughly that by the time they are adults, it simply feels like who they are. And because it is rewarded, praised, and mistaken for strength, it gets reinforced decade after decade until the mask and the face beneath it have become genuinely difficult to tell apart. Beyond the immediate social pressure, there is also the role that personal identity plays in keeping the mask firmly in place. For many people living this experience, the high-functioning exterior has been present for so long that it has become genuinely fused with their sense of self. They do not just perform competence. They have come to believe on some level that competence is all they are. That if they stopped managing everything perfectly, if they let the performance slip even once, whatever is underneath might be something that neither they nor the people around them could accept. This belief is almost never accurate, but it is remarkably common. And it is one of the main reasons that people who are clearly struggling from the inside wait years before they ever tell anyone the truth about how they are feeling. Society compounds this in ways that are hard to overstate. There is an enormous and largely unspoken pressure placed on people to appear well, to be functional, to maintain the performance of a life that is going according to plan. This pressure is not neutral. It operates differently depending on culture, gender, profession, and background, but it is present almost everywhere. Research shows that people hide their emotional pain most consistently when they fear being perceived as weak, as a burden, or as someone who cannot handle what life has handed them. They anticipate judgment. They anticipate the discomfort their honesty will create in the people around them. And so they curate, they perform, they post the happy photo and type the reassuring text and show up to the event. And the gap between the performance and the reality quietly widens. Social media has made this particular dynamic sharper and more painful than it has ever been before. A survey conducted in partnership with the National Alliance on Mental Illness found that approximately 20% of women who posted happy, upbeat content online admitted that the image portrayed the complete opposite of how they were actually feeling in that moment. They shared the smiling photo specifically because they did not feel safe sharing the truth. This is not vanity or deception in any simple sense. It is the logical behavior of people who have learned, often through years of lived experience, that the world has limited patience for real pain. The particularly troubling dimension of this experience is how long it can persist before it is ever identified, either by the person living it or by anyone around them. Unlike major depressive episodes, which often reach a point of crisis that forces recognition and action, high-functioning emotional emptiness tends to be chronic and quiet. Research on persistent depressive disorder shows that it frequently begins early in life and can continue for years with barely a ripple on the surface. The person keeps going. They adapt. They find ways to function through the numbness. And because they are functioning, because they are achieving and socializing and maintaining appearances, neither they nor the people who care about them tend to recognize what is actually happening until the accumulated weight of years of unaddressed suffering finally becomes impossible to carry quietly. There is something that people who have lived with this experience often describe when they finally put language to it, and it is this: the exhaustion of maintenance. Not the exhaustion of grief or crisis, but the bone-deep tiredness of running a performance 24 hours a day, of being the one who holds things together, of saying you are fine so many times it starts to feel less like a lie and more like a language you have forgotten how to escape. Therapists who work with high-functioning depression describe it as walking a tightrope that never ends. Every day the person wakes up, gets back on the rope, and performs the crossing again. Not because they want to, but because stepping off the rope feels more terrifying than staying on it. Because if they stop performing wellness, they will have to face what lives in the silence underneath. The people who carry this experience most heavily often share a particular quality that those around them tend to admire without understanding. They are extraordinarily attuned to the emotional states of others. They notice shifts in the room before anyone else does. They know instinctively when someone nearby is struggling, and they move toward that person with a kind of quiet efficiency that looks like compassion and genuinely is. But it also serves another function. Focusing on other people's pain is one of the most effective ways to avoid sitting with your own. Researchers who study this pattern describe it as a form of emotional displacement, a deeply ingrained habit developed over years of prioritizing everyone else's inner world above their own. The person who is always there for everyone else is often the last person in the room to be there for themselves. And the tragedy is that the very quality that draws other people to them is often the thing that has been costing them the most. What makes all of this especially important to talk about is that it is not rare. Depression in its various forms affects an estimated 300 million people worldwide. The portion of that number who experience it in this quiet, high-functioning masked way is significant. What research consistently shows is that what matters most, at least as a starting place, is simply being asked. Being asked in a way that leaves room for the actual answer. A real question from a person who has stopped moving long enough to actually receive whatever comes next. This is where the responsibility shifts from the individual in pain to the people around them. It asks us to pay closer attention than social performance usually requires. It asks us to notice the person who is always holding everyone else together, and to wonder what is holding them. It asks us to be slightly suspicious of the friend who is always fine, who never needs anything, who deflects every question about themselves with humor or redirection. Those are not signs of strength. They are often signs of a person who learned so early and so thoroughly to hide their pain that asking for help stopped feeling like an option long before you ever knew them. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, This conversation is for the person watching who recognized themselves somewhere in the last several minutes and is sitting with the quiet, strange feeling of being seen. The one who has been fine for so long they have almost started to believe it. The one who performs the crossing every day and tells no one the rope is fraying. The research is clear that unaddressed emotional emptiness does not stay stable. It does not simply remain manageable forever. Without being met, it tends to deepen. But the research is equally clear that it responds to being named, to being witnessed, and to the steady, patient work of building a connection between the functioning self and the suffering self that has been waiting to finally be acknowledged. You do not have to have fallen apart to deserve support. You do not have to have stopped functioning to be allowed to say that something inside you is not okay. Fine is not the same as well. And the bravest thing some people will ever do is stop pretending that it is. There is also a pattern worth naming that shows up repeatedly in clinical descriptions of this experience, and it has to do with the specific way that time feels for people living inside functional emptiness. Hours pass, days pass, weeks accumulate, and there is a persistent sense that nothing is really sticking. Not the good moments and not the difficult ones. Everything moves through without leaving much of a mark. Psychologists describe this as a disruption in the process by which meaningful experiences get encoded as part of your personal story. When the brain's meaning signal is suppressed, experiences do not register as significant even when they are. The person can report that something good occurred, but cannot feel that it did. This disconnect between knowing and feeling is one of the quietest symptoms of this entire experience, and one that almost never surfaces in conversation because from the outside it looks like nothing at all.